Hi, good morning, everybody. This is David Cross with you, and thank you for joining my video today on some of my additional lab projects that I'm working on. And this particular project and video today is going to discuss IPControl DNS domains, your external DNS domains, and the ability to compare an external SOA or even an internal domain that might be running on your internal servers to the SOA or serial number data that's compared and sorted in IPControl. So for every DNS domain, we maintain the serial number, refresh, retry, expire, defaults, and others as in IPControl that we then deploy to their servers, and then also from an external DNS if those servers are disparate or perhaps managed through different services. So the first thing I wanted to do is I looked into my PowerShell, which I'm really starting to pick up a lot of development in lately because of its variable enumeration and things that I can do with this, and it's quite simple to work with. But I ended up working with a very simple command, if you're not familiar with it, called resolve Dns Name. And effectively what it allowed me to do was to query a array of domains, which I'll put in my to here, and then to have it check a type, which in this case would be an SOA. And what would actually happen in that case then, and actually this isn't the command, so I would do it as a single in the resolve. This takes a single domain. My apologies, my script takes a, so we do maybe ipdevnet.com and then the type SOA. And in the simplest form of this, we can just get back in SOA. So we get back a value that represents the SOA, the serial number, and the administrator and server. Now I can also store this into various different variables if I want to. So I can say SOA, and then I can just print this out and look at the different variables parameters from there. So I thought, well, that's a real easy command, and that was easy to do. And I could write a real simple PowerShell script, which I did, and it kind of went through all of these different domains and did that. And I thought, okay, that's nice. Well, what I really wanted to do then is I wanted to have more of an interaction with it so that on the command parameter line that you can specify different options depending on your ultimate objective and whether that objective is to simply compare the SOA and then print out the SOA differences, or to update the information in IPControl like the serial number and the refresh values based on the SOA. And if the domain didn't exist, have the third option to physically create the DNS domain and import it with those sub default values. So on this, I turned it into a function. That function get IPC domain SOA. Various parameters on the input, and I'm going to keep this consistent with everything I've done in PowerShell. So I have an IPControl module that I'm working on. I'm really just about finished. I'm just trying to clean it up. I promised it out to some, so I should have a GitHub shortly with that. But in this PowerShell and in all of my IPControl APIs, I basically have two parameters that are always the same, and it's always IP executive and the username. I then have within my token process where I go out and get these values and log in, I have an encryption capability that it encrypts the password, it prompts for that password, stores it into a file, and then aggregates that information back into the file as I need to and pulls it in, decrypts it, etc. So I never pass the password on that line, but it is something that's part of my IPControl module. And we can, of course, go back over that at some point to see this. But in terms of the get IPC token, this is where I'm reading the data, passing it as a secure string, storing it as a username. So if you do multiple users, you can keep this. And it's going to store that into a dot directory under your users documents folders. Right. So I'm not going to go over that too much, but just kind of go through these values, and we can go back and revisit one of my PowerShell videos in the past. So in this command line, then, what I wanted to have is an array of domains, the flag of whether I want to import the domain to query IPC. Maybe I just wanted to print out the SOA, so I could omit these. Whether I want to update IPC, the DNS Server IP, which the client uses to query. Now, by default, it's using the stack and the IP that I have through my DHCP servers, but I could go out and specify another DNS server explicitly that allowed me to have recursion or others that I could do this with. So I do allow that option as an optional value. And then the last couple types here are whether or not I want to output the JSON. So if I'm updating or creating a new domain, I can output the JSON that is being used for that process. If it's just a CSV for the domain, I can output CSV. The output SOA is just kind of a list variable to compare. And then if we're doing things with the default domain types, which of course I set this to default, but if you're importing a new one, you would want to create it as, say, external or default or whatever your values are. Now in this process, I'm then going to read in either an array of domains. And this could be, again, a single domain or multiple domains represented by 0 through whatever number. I'm then going to count through the loops, just a value here. And then I'm going to check the DNS Server IP so that in the resolve DNS name, I either am going to pass it a explicit DNS server or I'm going to assume the server IP of the client. I don't really want any error action here. If these values come back null, I'm going to process it further. But I don't want the error action. I just want to do, simply check it, continue silently, and then do a quick timeout if it doesn't resolve it within the next period of time. The next part is I'm going to create basically 3 objects. The SOA, which I pull from the external, an IPC object that I'm going to pull from IPControl, and then today I updated the script to supply whatever the input script arguments are in the event that you wanted to further process or determine some other task based on those values. So as we go through the list of verifying these values, I'm then going to read each of these, and then I've created another API based on the new capability in IPControl 11 that will allow me to go out and get the domain by name, and I'm specifying the value, and pulling this out by its type. Within this value then, if it's checking the domain ID, meaning it found the ID or the domain or did not find it in this case, then it's going to go through and look and see, did you want to import this domain? And if it was true, you need to set a result that we're going to import the domain, passing it the domain values and the domain type. So we're effectively going in and creating a domain value in the API that is then going to create this information. And if I look into my node here again, we'll take a look at IPC domain. And in here, we're going to import this. We're going to set some default values, which again, you can, of course, change on the command line. And we could tell it to go ahead and pass in whatever the SOA values were. So one way to look at that there. And then this command is going to build this domain structure with those values and the other configurations and defaults, and then pass that into the import domain API that I have through the PowerShell. Now, when it does process this, if there is an output, it's going to add an additional capability. So in the object, if it's not found, it's going to add an object called IPC domain name or property and set it to the domain not found. Same thing in the SOA output. And the reason I'm doing this is so that if I'm checking against this domain, I can determine if the domain was empty or if it was a name in it. I can then go out and check and see if the SOA name, which is the domain name passed back, has a dot in it. That's all I want to check. Just make sure it has at least some level of domain values. I'm not going to do any further checks here, but probably should. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to read in that SOA object, and then I'm going to go in and get each of the different fields that are returned, name, type, TTL section, and then I'm going to return values based on that information that's set. And this is kind of what I expect this to look like when this information is returned and how I'm going to set the values for this. Okay, so I'm just running through and reading that. Then I do read through the IPC domain object that we created that went in and queried IPControl. And if it's not empty or not found based on that previous not found section, then I'm going to read its object properties and I'm going to set those into its IPC output. And this is what that information should look like in this structure. All right, so I'm labeling SOA, IPC, and the object combined. Now, lastly, I want to go ahead and I want to create these objects and add a couple other object variables. So I'm pulling some information out of IPControls and I'm adding that to the SOA output, which I'm going to change. I'm then going to add the script args that I mentioned, which will then show me on a line what the script arguments are. Then I'm going to go down and compare the SOA, compare it to the serial numbers. If they're different, I'm going to generate what the difference are and add that to the string to compare. And if they match, I want to specify that they match so you don't have to worry about any other lookups. We're then going to go out and build a CSV string so that if I'm looking at the information and the domain is there and it has the data, I'll read through it, parse out the data, and create the CSV string that's going to be read into this, and then later output the pipelines to the different options. Now the update IPC then runs through an in-place update, which I'm doing here in this API, and I'm just kind of modifying this to do an import, which is already supported in versions 9 and 10 of the APIs. So that's pretty straightforward. And then when I look at various strings of this, let me show you the command line how this would work then. So in the importing, and after we've set this, I'm going to set my server, my login for the server, and then I'm going to have a domain, and I'm going to do my local internal domain first. Now what I'm going to do here is I just want to do output SOA, and when you're using output SOA, you have to use the $true to specify any values that you want to run through there. Now what this is doing is it did the SOA query, pulled the data back, and this all the way up is effectively the external SOA. Now I did not query IPControl, but it appended the fields and just set them to empty. And you can see here the script arguments where I'm looking for query IPC or update, etc. are not set. So it didn't get any differences. So let's go ahead and do this time with a query IPC true, and then we should be able to determine if the value is the same in the database or if they're different. Here I show that the values are different, so I could actually turn around and do the update IPC true, and this should then go in and update the data, and then if I were to look at this within my database, it should then be set to whatever those values were. Now let's see if I can find my guy here. There he is. And then that should be 248, which as we read on the command line was 248 in that. So if I run this again, because it's already set and we already did the update, it should come back with matches to show you the update. All right. So that was the way I added the initial one. Now, if I look at, let's see, a domain like one of my externals here, and we'll do ipdevnet.com. I don't want to update this, but let's query it, and let's do these two. And we'll see that it's not in the database. There is no IPC. So I could now say import new domain, tell this true, and this will then go in and create my domain. And then if I tell it to query that again, it should see it. We'll see that there is a difference. And then I could tell it also to go ahead and update this to true as well. And then that will update the values to match. So maybe as you can see here, it gives you a little bit of flexibility and the ability to go out and query these pretty quickly. And then as I mentioned, you can have your domain input that you're checking be pretty much anything you want it to be. So I could do this as an array of strings and set that domains. And then when I run my command, pass it as a domains variable, and it'll do this for all of those values in the domains. And so you would get a full string. Right, so that's what I ended up with. pretty solid. I still have some troubleshooting to put in, and I have a couple other checks and balances I want to have to make sure that when a domain is added, that the values are set, or to inherit the SOA, and I'll probably set a flag to do that, and then probably a step to go ahead and do all of it at one point instead of multiple times. All right, so that's that was a real quick script, and that was just one of my projects this weekend, and I wanted to share that with you. I'll get this up on GitHub soon. I hope over the next week, and then I'll have some links that you can kind of download the code if you're interested for both these simple scripts that I'm running and also the more complex IPControl modules that I have. So take care and thanks for joining me, and I'll be back shortly with another video on some of the DHCP utilization and uploading to the callout manager and also the cloud appliance to report on some of your DHCP utilization and things like that. So I'll follow up with that shortly. Thanks again. Take care and have a great day.